Peace, peace. Welcome to another live reading. We are doing two a day. For some reason, once you get into a good book, sometimes it's hard to put it down, and I've kind of hit that stride with this book. So I enjoy this series. I enjoy reading this book. This is Salvation, Black People in Love by Bell Hooks. We are on chapter 9, Heterosexual Love, Union and Reunion. And, as always, I'll be doing a live reading, taking it paragraph by paragraph. I will pause to check the comments section to see if there are any questions that I can address in the moment, or any comments that I can, add to the reading just to enrich it. And then at the end of the reading of the chapter, I'll open it up for reflections. Those who want to, get on live, if you have 1,000 followers and you want to verbally or get on video and share your thoughts. And for those who cannot, I'll definitely read the comments, out loud as well. So without further ado, I'll get into this reading. If you would, these will eventually be on my YouTube, probably by the end of the week. And I have to clear up some space to get them uploaded or whatnot. So for those of you that might have missed some of it, you can, go back and listen, not just to the reading, but also to some of the reflections as well. So without further ado, this is Heterosexual Love, Union and Reunion from Bell Hooks, Salvation, Black People, and Love. There has never been a time in this nation when the bonds of love between black women and men have not been under siege. If slavery was not an institution powerful enough to destroy the ties that unite and bind us, we have every reason to hope that bonds of love, of union and reunion, will be ever possible between us. That was powerful. However, this does not mean that heterosexual relationships between black men and black women and men are not in crisis. They are. Talk to any black person who was active in the '60s struggle for black liberation, and they will recall that the most packed meetings were those focusing on black male-female relationships. Those were the days when astute black leaders acknowledged the need for there to be ongoing critical discussion about heterosexual bonds. Peace, Ben. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining. Bonds of affection and love that are forged in the midst of profound trauma and oppression have resiliency that can inspire and sustain generations. Our history as black people can never be marked solely by the experience of enslavement. Instead, it must be marked by the fusion of circumstance between the free and the bound. Even though there were only a small number of free black folks who chose to immigrate to this so-called new world, their presence had a profound impact on the imagination of the masses who were enslaved. Imagine how just the sight or knowledge of one free black person would have gripped the imagination of any enslaved individual. Among that small group of black folks who had migrated to the Americas by choice and not by coercion, black males were the majority group. Free black females were few. Any black male, free or slave, who wanted to have a union with a black woman had to confront the reality of slavery and indentured servitude. Historically, all unions between black women and men were forged within a culture of white supremacy wherein all bonding which did not serve the interests of white people was deemed suspect and threatening. No group of black people knew better than the slaves that positive union between black women and men threatened white supremacist claims on black bodies. Free and enslaved black folks fought hard to privilege these relationships by rituals and ceremony, both illegal and legal, because they recognized that solidifying these bonds, gaining public recognition of their value, was crucial to the freedom struggle. Reading accounts of heterosexual black relationships during slavery reveals the extent to which the desire to create long-standing domestic partnerships, whether through marriage or shacking, living together without benefit of clergy, often served as the catalyst inspiring individuals to fiercely resist bondage and work for freedom. Importantly, remembering that white supremacist thinking is always challenged by loving unions between black males and females sheds light on why there have been so many obstacles placed in the path of such unions. Socialized within the context of the United States to believe that men should be dominant and women subservient, the vast majority of African Americans have held in high esteem a patriarchal vision of family life. Despite the fact that the systematic institutionalization of white supremacy and everyday racism made it impossible for the vast majority of African Americans to create family life based on the sexist assumption that men should be providers working to sustain the material needs of the family and women nurturers taking care of the emotional needs and the concerns of the household, Black people have worked hard to conform to this model. Even when our lived experience indicated that the model of communal kinship with gender equality was both more constructive and more realistic in a world where employment was and is hard to find for any Black person, most Black folks continue to accept patriarchal notions of sex roles as the standard to judge and evaluate Black life. I can remember my mother expressing a desire to try and find work so that my father, who worked hard as a janitor, would not have to bear all the economic burdens of the household. But he was adamant that no wife of his needed to work, even if that meant material lack. To him, supporting his wife and family affirmed his manhood. This affirmation took precedence over material needs. That burns. Of course, the patriarchal idea that men should rule over women did not promote gender equity or love between Black women and men. All too often, heterosexual relationships based on sexist norms in Black life were places where men felt satisfied and women dissatisfied. Male domination does not lead to happy homes, no matter all the propaganda that suggests otherwise. Even in the most benevolent patriarchal households, women often feel unloved. When I was a child, I often heard adult Black females disparage Black men for not embracing the role of patriarchal provider. And while there were some men who were prevented from assuming this role because they lacked employment, there were also men who were gainfully employed who did not choose to offer their money to support wives and children. Every Black woman I know growing up dreamed of having a Black male partner who would give her financial support and allow her to be a housewife. Of course, the reality of class and race politics made it all but impossible for these fantasies to be fulfilled. If there were no jobs for the vast majority of Black men, how could they assume the role of providers? The failure of Black men to fulfill these fantasies created rage in many Black females. That rage intensified as employment opportunities increased, as more Black males found work but remained unwilling to assume the provider role. Very interesting indeed. No research has been done on Black males who work, who live in households with wives and children, but refuse to give their income to be providers. Daily we are bombarded with messages in mass media which tells us Black women are the strong matriarchs who enjoy being the heads of household, when the reality remains that very few Black women have had a choice. Indeed, just as Black females often feel rage that Black men do not deliver the economic goods, Black men often feel enraged that they are expected to provide. The economic realities of Black heterosexual life are rarely given proper attention in our society, even though struggles over money are a primary reason couples divorce, irrespective of race. Given the ongoing crisis of employment in Black life, these struggles are more intensified. 1 in 3 Black folks lives in poverty, and half of all Black children. Black people who have the same educational background as whites can expect to make 82 to 86% of the income of whites. Yet no one talks about how economic injustice creates a context for emotional strife in domestic households. For years now, this nation has acknowledged that Black men, and for that matter, all groups of men who are unable to provide for their families, often feel as though they are emasculated. That is all the more the case if the women in their lives are able to find work when the men cannot. Of course, patriarchal thinking presents this news up to the public as though it is not only natural for men to want to provide economically for the needs of others, but equally natural for men to feel castrated and depressed if they are deprived of access to the jobs that would enable them to be providers. While it is true that patriarchal socialization teaches men that their value lies with work and providing for others, it is also true that many men have long resisted this socialization. Masses of men, many of them white, have high-paying jobs yet withhold financial support from wives and children. These men do not seem to feel at all castrated because they are failing to assume the provider role. Men who provide economically in heterosexual unions are much more likely to use this as a means of exerting power and control over others in the household. Indeed, the notion that black men were castrated was rooted in the assumption that more often than not, black women were bringing home the bulk of the family income. Until feminist movement interrogated the notion that men should be the sole providers of families and changed the way we all think about the nature of work, some black men did feel that they could not assume their rightful role as provider. This led them to feel depressed and hostile towards black women who provided. The myth of the black matriarchy falsely projected the idea that black women were castrating black men by being dominant. Created and projected onto black life by a white supremacist patriarchal culture that did not want to assume accountability for the way in which racialized economic injustice assaulted black male self-esteem, the myth was used to encourage black men to enter the military and there regain their wounded and or lost masculinity. Ooh, that's a... It was definitely a strategic move for white male patriarchs to scapegoat and blame black women, encouraging black males to do the same because such thinking disrupted the bonds of solidarity that had been forged between black women and men working together to resist racism. No work really documents the extent to which post-civil rights uncritical acceptance of patriarchal thinking by black males wreaked havoc in black family life. When sex roles in black life did not conform to sexist patterns, black women and men often forged new paradigms of love and affection. From slavery on, black males and most black females had theoretically accepted the same sexism that was the norm in the dominant white patriarchy, but material deprivation caused by exploitation and oppression based on race and class meant that gender roles in black life could not conform to sexist norms. Black women were workers. Unemployed or marginally employed black men often cooked, cleaned, and did childcare. The fact that black women worked outside of the home and worked equally hard as black men in the anti-racist struggle was not seen as detrimental to the psychological welfare of the black family, but central to its survival. Gender equity among black women and men, however unchosen and relative, did not create a lack of love between couples, for everyone understood that solidarity was needed to ensure survival. Congressman and civil rights activist John Lewis tells the story of his parents' marriage in his memoir of the movement, Walking with the Wind. Married in 1932 to a sharecropper, his mother had no honeymoon with her husband because there was neither time nor money. Lewis recalls, after Eddie married my mother, they both joined the Lewis family in Lula's house, and my mother began working with them in those fields, sometimes side by side with her husband, other times working out for one local farmer or another, chopping or picking cotton for 50 cents a day. Whether or not a black woman would work was not a realistic option for most black families. Her economic contribution was desperately needed. Love flourished in situations where black women and men worked together mutually to sustain their bonds and to nurture families. Without feminist thinking undergirding the alternative gender arrangements black couples had to make in order to ensure material survival, even when they were productive and fruitful, these arrangements were often regarded as wrong by women and men alike. Most working black women longed for a time when they would be able to rely on their men to be the sole providers. Many white women did not understand this, and when the contemporary feminist movement began, it hailed work as the key to liberation and labeled black women already liberated. Oh, wow. In reality, most black women knew that they were not at all liberated by backbreaking low-wage labor. Working menial jobs where they were subjected to degradation and sexual harassment by racist white employers did not enhance black women's self-esteem. Significantly, during the early stages of feminist movement, Gallup polls showed black males to be the group of men most supportive of gender equity in the workforce. No. Please expound on that. Order my copy today. That's what's up. That's what's up. When militant black male leaders dominated the anti-racist movement, made freedom synonymous with subordination of black women, their uncritical embrace of the notion that black men had been symbolically castrated was not challenged by men. Individual black women active in anti-racist struggle and in what was then called women's liberation interrogated these myths and rightly refused to accept any notion that they were the oppressors of black men. Clearly, The widespread acceptance of the idea that black women were the enemy created more havoc in black life than any other idea. That havoc is well documented in the 1970 anthology, The Black Woman. Reprinted in the anthology was a 1966 essay by Abby Lincoln titled, Who Will Revere the Black Woman? Lincoln wrote, but strange as it is, I've heard it echoed by too many black full-grown males that black womanhood is the downfall of the black man, in that she, the black woman, is evil, hard to get along with, domineering, suspicious, and narrow-minded. In short, a black, ugly, evil you-know-what. Like her progressive black women comrades, Lincoln called attention to the way in which this thinking justified sexist black male use of coercion and abuse as a means to subordinate and or dominate black women. She identified the extent to which domestic violence and rape were becoming a norm in black life. Not liberated. Afternoon, brother. Good afternoon, T. Thank you so much for joining. Echoing Lincoln's sentiments in her essay, The Black Woman as a Woman, Kay Lindsay asserted, those who are exerting their manhood by telling black women to step back into a domestic, submissive role are assuming a counter-revolutionary position. Black women likewise have been abused by the system, and we must begin talking about the elimination of all kinds of oppression. In her insightful essay on the issue of roles, Toni Cad Bambara went to the heart of the matter and critiqued both black males and females for regarding each other through negative sexist stereotypes. Emphasizing the importance of liberation struggle as the measure of womanhood, she urged recognition of the need to affirm progressive gender roles, stating, invariably, I hear from some dude that black women must be supportive and patient so that black men can regain their manhood. The notion of womanhood, they argue, and only if pressed to address themselves to the notion do they think of it or argue, is dependent on his defining his manhood. And I wonder if the dudes who keep hollering about their lost balls realize that they probably surrendered them either to Mr. Charlie in the marketplace trying to get that El Dorado, or to Miss Ann in bed trying to bang out some sick notion of love and freedom. It seems to me that you find yourself in destroying illusions, smashing myths, laundering the head of whitewash, being responsible to some truth, to the struggle. That entails at the very least cracking through the veneer of this sick society's definition of masculine and feminine. Ooh. Bambara and her progressive black women colleagues worked hard to call attention to the destructive fallout caused by hardcore black male support of patriarchal thinking, but their words did not have widespread impact. All right. In actuality, large numbers of sexist black women were as willing to embrace the notion that they should be more subordinate or at least act the part as were black men. Since black women did not then join together in unity to support the need for progressive visions of gender roles in black life, the stage was set for conflict between females. When younger women like myself embraced feminist thinking, we were often seen as traitors to the race and judged harshly by black males and females alike. At the peak of feminist movement, Michelle Wallace's polemical nonfiction book, Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman, in conjunction with Nataxi Shang's play for colored girls, was a growing body of protest fiction by black women writers called national attention to the conflicts in black heterosexual relationships. For the first time ever in the nation's history, television talk shows featured black women writers talking about the dynamics between black women and men. Of course, none of the discussion focused on the issue of love. It was all focused on the question of power. Issues like whether black women were matriarchal and castrating, holding the black man back, ruled the day. No one talked about the overall psychological impact of the rupture in black solidarity created by patriarchal thinking. By casting black females as the enemy, black men were essentially stating that black women were not worthy of their love and regard. And underlying this insistence on black female unworthiness was the assumption that as long as black men could not be patriarchs, they could not love themselves. While all this dialogue was happening in academic and activist settings, in everyday life, the vast majority of black women and men grappled with the issue of male domination. Females who wanted black male partners felt that they had to conform to sexist expectations. Tragically, where much attention had been given to heterosexual bonds of affection and love prior to those conflicts, all the attention was now focused on black male satisfaction. There was no discussion of whether or not patriarchal black men who ruled over home and family were actually emotionally fulfilled and loved. Hey, K-Shep, we back at it again. In our patriarchal home, love for our father always took second place to our fear of him. Growing up in a household where our mother was willingly subordinate to our father and used Christian teaching to justify female obedience to males, I witnessed firsthand the way in which male domination, like all forms of domination, makes love impossible. I'm going to read that again. She says, growing up in a household where our mother was willingly subordinate to our father and used Christian teaching to justify female obedience to males, I witnessed firsthand the way in which male domination, like all forms of domination, makes love impossible. That's powerful. While one can care for someone deeply and dominate them, it is impossible to truly love someone and dominate them. Love and domination are antithetical. And when all you've ever wanted isn't enough, Rabbi Harold Kushner reminds us that love can be generated only between people who see themselves as equals, between people who can be mutually fulfilling to each other. When one commands and the other obeys, there can be loyalty and gratitude, but not love. While benevolent patriarchal homes where men rule without violent and or abusive coercion can be and often are households where affection and care abound, love cannot be sustained fully in any environment where the spiritual and emotional growth in any family member is not fully encouraged. Insightfully, Kushner, echoing psychoanalyst Carl Jung, reminds us that love and power are not compatible. You can love someone and give him the room and the right to be himself, or you can try to control him to make him do your will, whether for his own good or for the enhancement of your own ego. But you cannot do both at the same time. When sexist black males became obsessed with the need to exert power over black females, a barrier was created blocking our capacity to love one another. Man. Is she... Oh, oof. She is time traveling. Nowhere was a shift in black male thinking about the nature of love more evident than in black popular music. In black expressive culture, a dialogue has existed primarily in musical lyrics. Singers of every ilk, whether blues or R&B or other forms, sang about the longing to love and be loved. Popular male vocalists like Sam Cooke and Otis Redding gave voice to men's longing, their emotional vulnerability. Songs with lyrics like, "Try a little tenderness," "This is my lover's prayer, I hope it reaches out to you," and the eternally popular Aretha Franklin singing, "All I'm asking for is respect when I come home," voiced the emotional conflict of black males and females seeking to learn how to love. Today's popular lyrics express cynicism about love. Lust and struggles for power define the nature of black heterosexual romance. Dr. Dre, R. Kelly, and a host of other singers project hateful images of women as objects. Lyrics that say, "You remind me of my Jeep," dehumanize females. In misogynistic rap music, women are degraded objects, B-words, and hoes. While older black folks often sit back and criticize the hatred of females these lyrics express, they do not link this misogyny to the overall insistence on the part of black leaders and many of their followers that black male patriarchy will redeem the black family. Oh, man. Fortunately, female singers like Lauryn Hill and Michelle Indiacello are wonderful examples of black artists who explore love and relationships with grace, honesty, and respect. Hazel says, love and fear create the same brain stimulation. Servant Inspirator, have you spoke about Whitney? Today is her birthday, honoring her life. Most definitely want to honor Whitney Houston. So thank you so much for calling it out. That was a word. Awesome. Awesome. We'll continue reading chapter 9. Indeed, there is often so much discussion of the black family, usually referring to a unit composed of adults and children, that not enough attention or value is given to the emotional relationship between black heterosexual partners. This has to do also with the legacy of slavery. Since marital unions between black men and women were devalued and couples were separated, this pattern of devaluation continued even after slavery ended and on until the present. When we read about powerful anti-racist black female leaders like Sojourner Truth, the message that comes across is that their greatest sorrow in slavery had to do with separation from children and not from the men with whom they sired those offspring. Sojourner Truth's declaration, "When I cried out in a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard," poignantly expresses this lament. Yet where is the lamentation for the woundedness and brokenheartedness that has marked and marred unions between black women and men? Talk about accountability. Yes, this is a word. While courageous progressive black females like Abby Lincoln offered these lamentations as part of the anti-racist, anti-sexist resistance struggle in the late 60s and early 70s, as mass movements for social justice lost momentum, so did vigilant affirmation focus on black heterosexual relationships. Divorce rates, which are much higher for black couples than for other groups in this society, are one serious indication of crisis. Having had the good fortune to be raised in a small southern black community in the 50s where I saw many black couples committed to each other for life, I was disbelieving when I entered a predominantly white academic world where relationships between black women and men were presented as always problematic, a world of absent fathers and lovers, of domestic strife and violence. While there were troubled relationships in the world of my growing up, the norm was black couples like my grandparents and parents who forged lifetime commitments, staying together through thick and thin. I witnessed mutual love between black men and women throughout my childhood, and that witnessing has been vital, as it has helped me keep faith in black heterosexual love in a world where the messages received through mass media tell everyone no lasting love exists between black women and men. Man. Currently, music videos and films created by black artists offer us a problematic a vision of romantic heterosexual relationships as any vision created by mainstream white culture. Again and again, black female bodies are objectified by a pornographic gaze. Black men are portrayed as desiring a woman solely on the basis of how she looks. Physical appearance is important, and no one can deny that it's a factor shaping desire. But when it is the sole or most important factor determining desire or partner choice, problems arise. Many black men are in unfulfilling relationships with women with whom they share no common interests or values because they were initially drawn solely to the way the woman looked. In mass media, relationships between black women and men are rarely based on shared communication. Once, when I was teaching a course on black women writers, I asked the more than 40 black students in the classroom if they remembered their parents talking together. The vast majority of individuals could not recall open communication and or discussion of problems. In our family, my parents often talked at each other rather than with each other. Even if our father was in the same room, our mother might say to one of us children, "Tell your father," and he might do the same. Exactly. A 1992 issue of Essence magazine with a picture of Malcolm X on the cover included a story about the marriage of Betty Shabazz and Malcolm X titled "On Loving and Losing Him." One of the few black women married to a famous black leader who have ever publicly uttered even the slightest criticism of husbands, whether they are dead or alive. Shabazz shared in this piece that she subordinated her own desires and concerns to Malcolm's, acknowledging not only a lack of communication between them, but that Malcolm was oftentimes controlling. Malcolm X had already revealed a misogynist bent in the autobiography of Malcolm X, as told to Alex Haley. Early on in his career, he openly expressed conventional sexist thinking about females. That is, women are manipulative, betraying, and licentious. Shabazz shared that her husband told her before they were married that it would be very difficult for him to tell a wife where he was going, when he was coming back, that he was driven by the fear of a woman having control. And she confessed, when we got married, I never asked his whereabouts. Shabazz unwittingly shared her husband's undesirable traits, even as she described the marriage in glorious terms, waxing eloquent. I knew he loved me for my clear brown skin. It was very smooth. He liked my clear eyes. He liked my gleaming dark hair. I was very thin then, and he liked my black beauty, my mind. Of course, nothing in this piece would offer a reader who did not know about Malcolm X information about his politics, philosophy, or activism. At the same time, there is no information about what was actually on Betty Shabazz's mind. We do not know from this discussion whether her political vision was similar to her husband's, whether they talked politics and so on. Instead, Shabazz outlines a very conventional sexist marriage where the husband goes out into the world and the wife stays home and takes care of the children. It was only after her husband died that Shabazz assumed responsibility for her intellectual and political growth. Like Coretta Scott King, in her marriage, she accepted being the woman behind the man, subordinated to his whims and desires. Despite widespread media coverage of Martin Luther King's sexual infidelities, his widow has never talked about the problematic nature of their marriage. Wedded to their husbands in life and death, these women became famous widows, profiting from and keeping alive the legacy of the men they married. Neither Shabazz nor King married again. They never talked publicly about desiring a new relationship. Conforming to the sexist notion of the dutiful wife, their experiences did not serve as a catalyst for them to assume leadership roles by offering political insights into the nature of black heterosexual bonds. Their allegiance to patriarchy stood in the way of any will to talk about the problematic nature of male domination. As black female role models, they represented the status quo, even though it is evident to any researcher critically examining their lives that these marriages were not unions based on mutual communication and understanding. They were based on male domination and female subservience. Like most high-profile black marriages, can we imagine a charismatic black man never marrying again if his female partner died? But black females married to black men are expected to remain bonded, to remain loyal to his memory if the male dies. Many black males share Malcolm X's fear of being controlled by a woman. This fear often stems from childhood experiences where mothers smothered their sons using ties of affection to bind and control them. The all-giving mother who meets her son's every need tends to also seek to shape and control his actions. As a child, the male may fear that any attempt to assert autonomy will cut him off from mother's affection. So he conforms to every wish, even as he may feel rage at her possessiveness. To please mom, young black males often create a seductive, false self, which they use to manipulate and work around the domineering, controlling mother. The idealization of black mothers as the epitome of femininity has always made it difficult for black males either to critique their mothers, even when they are dominating and abusive, or to resist symbolically assuming the role of surrogate lover. Lots of black mothers look to their sons for the effectual engagement that is often not there between them and grown black male peers. These mothers are often afraid of losing their sons, and especially of losing their power and influence over them. To protect and keep their bond primary, they may teach the black child, the male child from an early childhood, to regard all other women negatively, to see them as destroying predators. This is emotional incest, and all incest is abusive. Oh, man. So that's why they don't like Mammy Evers. No wonder, then, that the mother-child paradigm often is the one example of male-female bonding black males have. Black males who are infantilized by overbearing mothers who try and meet their every need often expect all other women to do the same. When a black female partner refuses this role, they may act out or see her as hard and demanding. These mama's boys may grow up to desire a woman who is just like mama, but they may also vent the rage and hostility they felt over being controlled early in life by the powerful woman mother in adult romantic relationships. She's driving up so many streets right now. It's ridiculous. Okay. When interracial dating became more of an accepted norm, black males often talked about the fact that they felt sexually free with white females because they did not see them as being like their mothers. Oh my God. Okay. Um, Most of the black males I encounter remain reluctant to critically examine psychoanalytically both their relationships with their mothers and the way in which those relationships became the model for all other relationships. Just as the relationships with their mothers may have had a sadomasochistic push-pull dimension, this becomes the central trait of their adult heterosexual romantic unions. Since the will to power is always central in this type of bond, the conditions for sustained love rarely emerge. Oh my God. Okay. In so many black families, this, like those of other groups in our culture, whether fathers are present or absent, relationships are seen as sites of powerful struggle where one person is always on top. A single heterosexual female parent may feel that she must always establish her control over home and children, letting boyfriends know that they cannot dictate in her household. While her actions may represent a resistance to male domination, they are an affirmation of patriarchal lessons which teach everyone that the home must have a ruler, and usually that the one who pays the bills rules the roost. To change this thinking collectively, black folks must begin to think of home and heterosexual relationships as locations where everyone's needs can be met, where there can be mutual understanding and satisfaction. This vision of mutual love is not one that we see in the mass media or hear high-profile black couples talk about publicly. This book is unpacking a whole lot. Yes, absolutely. There have been few marriages between black men and women highlighted in the mass media where the emphasis is on mutual love and partnership. For years, we have been grateful to have the example of Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis. I love them. Initially, actress Jada Pinkett spoke eloquently about mutuality prior to her marriage to Will Smith, and he followed suit. Yet much of what he has conveyed about the nature of their union since then has followed the conventional patriarchal model. Oh my gosh. At public events, he tells jokes about her keeping him in line, constructing, however humorously, an image of her as a conventional, nagging wife who keeps him in check. Man, she was a fortune teller. Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm sorry. It's just that's very ironic that she added that. Okay, and I'm curious to your thoughts on that. Once we get into the open mic. Heterosexual black males in the public eye who speak positively about marital unions with black women tend to cast their wives always in the role of either support staff, i.e., the woman behind the man who really runs the show, or maternal police, i.e., she keeps me in line. Michael Jordan and Denzel Washington are two prime examples. Again, the nature of love is not discussed. This is equally true of black male intellectuals who, though not as highlighted in the mass media as movie stars and politicians, are seen as leaders shaping the action of a black public concern with black heterosexual bonding. Cultural critic Michael Dyson's love letter to his wife in a recent book honors her presence in a progressive way. Yep, hence the Oscars was very patriarchal. Facts. 20 years ago, folks, she pretty much prophesized on that piece. All too often, black men say nothing about heterosexual unions between black women and men until mainstream white culture highlights a crisis. When Anita Hill testified against Clarence Thomas in the Senate hearings about his Supreme Court appointment, black men came out of the woodwork in droves to support Thomas and denounce Hill as a traitor to the race. Okay, I'm sorry, I gotta stop laughing. Few black men took a public stand against sexual harassment. Likewise, when boxer Mike Tyson was accused and convicted of rape, masses of black men supported him, accusing the young woman who he victimized as being a traitor, a manipulative whore, and so on. The same criticism can be made of the late Tupac Shakur, who always expressed love for black females, but then stood by while his peers raped a young woman. All the events of the last few years, which highlight heterosexual contact between black men and women, reveal the pervasiveness of sexism in black communities in the black male mindset. It cannot be stated often enough that domination makes love impossible. I'll repeat it again. It cannot be stated often enough that domination makes love impossible. Black men who embrace sexism believe it is the ability to dominate that makes them men. They choose power over love. That sexism continues to lead black males to classify black women as Madonnas or whores. The black female Madonna is consistently portrayed as one who stands behind her man, silently obeying his will or publicly pretending to do so and satisfying his needs in private. The whore is always portrayed as the woman who talks too much, too loudly, who talks back, a woman who has needs of her own and is not afraid to satisfy those needs. Any black female risks being labeled a whore, whether she is sexually active or not, by sexist black men if she does not conform to their expectations of desirable femininity. Once a woman has been labeled a whore and or a B-word, it becomes possible for sexist black males to justify their abusive behavior in relation to her. In her collection of autobiographical essays, Straight No Chaser, How I Became a Grown-Up Black Woman, Jill Nelson recalls in an evening when she is sitting at a bar next to a stranger, a drinking black male who, as she puts it, proudly slurs as he tells her that he does not date black women. When she asks him to explain, he shares his perception that black women are too hard, too mean, too demanding, and always in a man's face, got something to say about everything. Nelson responds by sharing the insight. Maybe it's not black women you're not interested in. Maybe it's that you don't want an equal partner. With this counterpoint, their discussion ends. Yep. Still haven't learned our lesson. Oh, I just understand the depth of an insult now. In her collection of essays, Nelson continually calls attention to the way in which male domination and individual self-hatred makes it impossible for most black males and females to know love. Analyzing mass media devaluation of black womanhood and black manhood, she reminds us African Americans, the biggest consumers of television, are those who need it least and are harmed by it. Despite the efforts of critics and activists, negative and often violent representations of black women, men, and children continue to dominate with devastating effect. What would make us think we can watch television and then go into the real world with a positive image of, much less respect for, black women? Black people, turn the television off. Without images of loving black folks in the mass media, all viewers, especially black audiences, are given the impression that love is not a black thing. That all our relationships are predatory, that struggles for power prevail. Even though films like Sprung, Love Jones, Woo, and The Best Man celebrate bondings between young black males and females, the behavior of the characters suggests that they are adolescents, emotionally insecure, and unable to relate as mature adults. The absence of sophisticated screen images of black heterosexual relationships is due to the combined effect of racism and sexism in both producers and consumers. Fearful of having a product that will not sell, cultural workers who have a more progressive vision often end up giving up or compromising. When a celebrated filmmaker like Spike Lee finally offered a more progressive vision of black female sexuality and black male-female interaction in the film Girl 6, it was trashed by critics and viewers. Audiences have to be educated to embrace more progressive images. That remains a difficult project in a world where viewers often want films to resonate with their real-life experiences. In real life, most relationships between black males and females are not based on mutual respect and equality. Strife and conflict, secrets and betrayal constitute an ongoing pattern in many of these relationships, so viewers are not disturbed when this is what is portrayed on the screen. Yet until different images can be imagined in the minds of both those who produce images and those who are trying to build relationships in real life, the loving bonds we seek cannot emerge. As long as black heterosexual relationships are primarily seen as settings for competition and struggle, love cannot become the order of the day. Many black folks, especially males, like to imagine that if all black women and men would just conform to the sexist roles assigned them, everything would be harmonious. Black families would thrive. In reality, patriarchal black households where women are subservient and the male is in charge, providing and protecting, are often loveless. Love cannot prevail when one person must suppress his or her subjectivity, desires, and feelings in order to please another. And even when this does happen, patriarchal men often still Patriarchal men often still feel dissatisfied, still feel an emotional lack. They may try to fulfill that lack by seeking relationships outside their primary home, creating an atmosphere of secrecy and mistrust that ultimately erodes intimacy. Man. Anyone living in a traditional black community has witnessed the bourgeoisie patriarchal marriage where everything appears to be harmonious because all genuine feeling is repressed. It's often difficult for the powerless to imagine that seemingly powerful men can be damaged by living in a state of emotional lack, but the truth remains that males become psychologically wounded when they embrace patriarchal notions of manhood that render them unable to express feelings. Men and women alike are often depressed in these settings. That depression can be expressed by emotional withdrawal or acting out. Having affairs is the primary way dissatisfied partners act out. In their recent autobiography, In This Life Together, Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee share with readers the values that have helped them sustain a long and loving marriage. Speaking openly about extramarital affairs, they state, "It occurred to us from observation and from reasoning that extramarital sex was not what really destroyed marriages, but rather the lies and deception that invariably accompanied it." Lost you after patriarchal men. Damn, it's getting chappy. So I want to make sure. Can you all hear me? I'm gonna make sure my Wi-Fi is on. It is on. So you should be getting a clear signal. If you don't, I do apologize. I'll read that last paragraph again. Anyone living in a traditional black community has witnessed the bourgeoisie patriarchal marriage where everything appears to be harmonious because all genuine feeling is repressed. It's often difficult for the powerless to imagine that seemingly powerful men can be damaged by living in a state of emotional lack, but the truth remains that males become psychologically wounded when they embrace patriarchal notions of manhood that render them unable to express feelings. Men and women alike are often depressed in these settings. That depression can be expressed by emotional withdrawal or acting out. Having affairs is the primary way dissatisfied partners act out. In their recent autobiography, In This Life Together, Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee share with readers the values that have helped them sustain a long and loving marriage. Speaking openly about extramarital affairs, they state, "It occurred to us from observation and from reasoning that extramarital sex was not what really destroyed marriages, but rather the lies and deception that invariably accompanied it." Okay? All too often in black heterosexual relationships, dishonesty is not seen as counterproductive. Despite the longevity in most marriages between black women and men I witnessed growing up, men in those marriages regularly cheated on their wives. Conventional patriarchal assumptions about the nature of masculine sexuality justified male sexual roaming. A popular television phrase, "have gun will travel," was translated into black vernacular as "have the D word will travel." That's actually hilarious. Within traditional sexist relationships and marriages, men were not expected to be faithful. Real men proved their maleness not by remaining faithful. A faithful man was often seen as a p-whipped man. P-whip being, I'm currently reading this masterpiece. Good. I'm glad you're reading. That's awesome. Please share your thoughts in the comments. We're in chapter 9, Heterosexual Love. When I settled down in a long-term relationship with a black male who respected my rights and with whom I had open and honest communication, his male friends ridiculed him for being whipped. In their minds, a real man would not share his feelings and thoughts or explain his actions to a woman. After more than 10 years, sexist thinking prevailed in our relationship and we parted. Though politically progressive about issues of race and class, when it came to the issue of gender, this partner, along with the majority of black males I have dated, wanted a woman whose primary reason for living was meeting his needs, particularly sexual needs. Yep, unfortunately, TikTok is rarely the app to get people to change since sensationalism is money. That's fact. Or called a simp. Yeah, simp would be the more common common era phrase that's used now. Whip was 1990s or whatnot. When I chose to leave this long-time bittersweet relationship, most of the black folks in my life felt I was making a mistake. To them, ours was one of the best relationships they had ever seen between a progressive black woman and a man. While we had conflicts and problems, we had handled them judiciously with counseling and open discussion. Many of these folks felt I was disappointed because I was expecting too much in the first place, expecting a black man to support gender equality both in the public sphere and in the private sphere, expecting open and honest communication. Things that should be basic in a loving relationship were seen as unreasonable demands for a black male. I left this relationship and went to teach at Yale University. Hanging out with the staff who worked in African American studies, I once had a conversation with a black woman friend who asked me to tell her what I wanted in a partner. I told her that I most wanted someone committed to open, honest communication, to processing and talking things over, especially if there was conflict. I can still remember hearing her hearty laughter as she responded, "If that's what you want, then you are not talking about being with a black male." Dang. Man, here for the informative reading. Thank you. Thank you for joining. At that time, I was 35 years old, living far away from the segregated black community of my growing up years. As frightened then as I was when I entered a predominantly white college on the West Coast when I was 18 by the cynical takes on black masculinity I heard everywhere, I continued to hold in my mind and memory the images of diverse black masculinity I had known before leaving my home community. In that world, I had known loving black men, witnessed them in relationships with wives, family, and community, and I persevered in my belief that loving black men exist in diverse black communities. Honoring their presence in my life, I held and hold to the belief that black males are as capable of giving love as anyone else. Despite the problems of my first longtime primary relationship, we always communicated well. While I have been in a live-together committed relationship with only 2 men in my life, both black, they were both men who were willing to engage in critical dialogue and constructive exchange. Bonds of affection continued to unite us even after the relationships ended because we did process all that had happened while we were together. When problems were beyond our understanding, we sought professional help. Obviously, we live in a society that remains white supremacist, capitalist, and patriarchal. As long as these systems dominate all our lives, black people, and especially anti-sexist black couples, will always need to vigilantly create the alternative ground where our love can grow and flourish. Much of what we encounter in the mainstream culture will militate against this love. More and more, black people are internalizing a negative vision of black heterosexuality. Unless we continually and collectively challenge the construction of our bonds as always and only predatory and ruthless, all signs of love between black women and men will be erased. It says many men do not want to dissect their thoughts, actions, and feelings. That's facts. That's facts. Cassie says men nowadays don't believe in therapy or couples counseling as a tool of relationship success. Also facts. Representations of loving black couples, whether real or fictional, are not interesting to an American audience hungry for pathological images of black life. A hunger fueled by white supremacist thinking. As more and more black consumers internalize white supremacist thought, colluding with the dominant culture, these images increasingly come to be accepted by everyone as definitive statements about who we are and how we love. Most consumers fail to understand that any black cultural worker or producer who does not own the means of production must always find support for a project by pitching it to white producers, most of whom are unenlightened about the way in which racist biases shape their perceptions of black life. There is always a small body of artistic work created which conveys loving black bonds that may never find its way to any public because those who market the goods may see it as irrelevant. Andrew Tate is setting my community back. Oh, facts. Andrew, man. Oh man, Andrew Tate. I got a whole mouthful for him. Black consumers have become complacent. A movie or book that has black characters is often hailed and celebrated, no matter its quality. Trashy work by the Macmillan sisters or male author Omar Tyree are often wrongly viewed as serious literary work. Where are our books of love letters, our biographical and fictional narratives of complex love relationships between black women and men? And where is our continued support of this work when it appears? If this work already exists in the shadows, then it is our responsibility as progressive black people to bring it into the light of day. This is no simple task. When I chose to write a memoir about my longtime relationship with a black male writer and intellectual, I received criticism from conservative black thinkers, male and female, who raised issues about the importance of privacy, who, without even reading the book, tried to suggest it was an attack on the brother. Ironically, had these individuals been in power and control of the mass media, my book might never have been published. To ensure the future of black heterosexual relationships, we need to stop the secrets and lies. We need to talk openly about how black men and women relate, about ways class differences inform our attitudes, about love, about the addiction to male domination that is strong among black men of all classes. We need to create the cultural space to talk about the love relationships we have that are fulfilling and satisfying. In some cases, we must see the sacrifice of privacy as part of the anti-racist, anti-sexist resistance struggle, wherein critical vigilance requires sharing our positive and negative stories. We can only decolonize our minds, let go of the images of lovelessness that daily bombard our psyches, by erasing those images and putting in their place representations of care and affection, of black women and men bound by everlasting ties of mutual love. I just read to you Salvation, Black People in Love by Bell Hooks, chapter 9 on heterosexual love. And as customary with these live readings, I definitely offer up my platform, for those who want to share their reflections on what they heard, or just want to speak about loving or unloving heterosexual relationships between black men and black women. Keep in mind that this chapter does focus on heterosexual love, but the next chapter that we're going to get into is titled "Embracing Gayness." So we will also talk about, loves that are, love relationships that are not heterosexual. So I just want to make sure that you understand that, we will add balance to this conversation, because the conversation of black love is not just a conversation about heterosexuality, and I don't want that to be the impression of this discussion. But Cassie says we can always do it here on TikTok. It's powerful representation if we use it right. I agree. I think that black love is a spectrum, absolutely, and it's telling that we are still having these same conversations about love. I think, and this may be due to the fact that the message in the church or religious settings, because I don't want to just place it on Christianity, have largely not changed, right? You get a few, quote unquote woke conversations about sexuality and love from a spiritual perspective, but by and large, those narratives have not changed in the last 20 years, i.e., for example, T.D. Jakes' recent monologue on, female and male gender roles. So I think because the conversation has not really changed, that's why, I can read a book that was published in 2001, and it seems like it was published, yesterday, even though, Bell Hooks is sadly now passed away. Bless her soul. You know what I mean? But Cassie says, I notice patriarchal men only talk about dominance and never talk about what a loving relationship looks like. Absolutely. There's almost no way for black men to learn about our values as black women, or to learn about our value as black women. That's troubling to me. I think that it is definitely not in the mainstream. It's to learn about the value of black women, you have to first have an open ear to actually hear black women speak, what their experience is like, and be open to an experience that paints a narrative that might be very different than yours. You know what I mean? I think, and I'm only speaking for myself, but I am, as a man, as a black man, we get so focused on, the racism that we deal with in this world, and being the victim or the one that is perpetrated on. And then we get so locked into that discussion that we can't even imagine a world where we too are also oppressing other people through sexism. In this case, black women or the woman that you're with, because just because the woman you're with is not black does not mean that sexism and that misogyny does not spill over into that relationship. It just means you may have less overall leverage over her ability to leave that relationship, or to have reprisal as far as like police and all those type of things. But overall, if you're a misogynist, if you have that in you, it's going to spill over into any relationship that you're dealing with. In many cases, unless you just particularly just don't jive with black women, in case you might, because of the whole mother thing. You know what I mean? I feel it starts from black men not valuing themselves and having to rely on external validation. That's facts. Um, Black men who have these leading platforms leave out the concept of love. No, absolutely. It's true. And it's often. I think it's not just in this discussion, and I'll use Christianity as an example. But when you listen to a lot of fire and brimstone sermons, they talk about what you're gonna do, what you can do to get you into hell. You know what I mean? They talk a lot about that. And then in the last 5 minutes of the sermon, they talk about heaven, because the goal is to pile on the guilt and the shame and the fear of fire and brimstone. And then at the end of the sermon, you're like, oh my gosh, how do I escape this? And then they give you the plan of salvation. But they don't really, at least in those type of sermons, they don't talk about how you live as a Christian, or what the Christian walk looks like, or how even as a Christian, these are still things that people do, as far as sinful behaviors, as far as all those particular pitfalls. So you don't necessarily get the counseling that will empower you to walk in a life that reflects Christ. You know what I mean? You're only given the fear of what it means to not have Christ. And so there's people in the church that are just kind of huddle. Oh, I just got to get back to church, but they're not necessarily empowered to know, for one, that the church is you. You know what I mean? That this is just a building, and the church is you, and the Holy Spirit inhabits you, and wherever you are, that's where the church is. Because if they told them that, then that would mean that they wouldn't have as much control to keep bringing them back to the church building, to invest in the church fund and to tithe and all these other things. You know what I mean? So it's that kind of cycle of, in some ways it can be a cycle of abuse if you're not giving them the whole truth, if you're only selectively feeding them things that keep them dependent on the system that's been established, which is not necessarily in congruence with, what Christianity is. You know what I mean? I don't know how I got on that tangent. And it typically circles back to a man being the vehicle to salvation. Oh, facts. Even though the church might be comprised of 80% women, you know what I mean? It's only the men that are glorified in leadership, which begs the question. I mean, what do you do in a society where a lot of the men are incarcerated, or are being, prematurely, expired because of various circumstances? Is it still, but we still can't have female leadership? You know what I mean? It's like, well, that means that the pool of leadership is very small, because only a man can lead. And who's to say that man isn't anywhere near qualified over the different women that are in that congregation? The best marketing strategy: create a problem, then present a solution to the problem you created. Ooh, that's the toxic side of religion. Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like our relationship with black men. Yeah, and talking about that again, where it's like, okay, you pile all these problems on single black mothers and say, well, if only a man was present, you wouldn't have these problems. But then knowing that, you know what I mean, many women are not going to get into those relationships, you know what I mean, because of, one, the amount of men versus women in that particular city, plus the amount of, men that want to be in a committed relationship, which all men don't want to be in a committed relationship. Those that are available to do so, also is limited. So then you have this mythos, this myth of, if only I had a black man, I would be able to, get these particular, this particular lifestyle. And then when you get a man, it's like, oh, well, because you got a man, who are you to complain? At least you got a man. And that's not me. Again, I speaking as a person who contributed to that problem, not someone who's above it. If my father was present, my life would have been worse. So no, right? So accurate, acute of an observation. Yes. So, vetting is difficult when so many lie, and the backdrop is toxic patriarchy. Also, facts, because that goes back to the well, women should just choose better. Well, what are your available options to choose better? And if the options are presented as good options and then turn out to be false advertising, how is that your fault? You know what I mean? If I go, not to going back to R. Kelly, because he's, you remind me of my Jeep. If I'm going to the car lot to buy a Jeep and the car salesman says, "Hey, this has got a great engine. This is brand new Jeep," and then when I get it on the freeway, the engine falls out of it. That's on the salesman. That's not on me. You know what I mean? Unless, because they misrepresented the product. All right. But Disaster Girl Magic says, my father was present and only served to traumatize and bring down the family. Definitely, my heart goes out to you. I think there are a lot of black women and black men that experienced those type of traumas where it's like, no, just because someone is present doesn't mean they're going to be, what's the word? Beneficial. Just because someone is present doesn't mean they're going to be beneficial. You know what I mean? Absolutely. So if, offer this platform, if anybody would like to share verbally, if you want to get on the platform and speak, we definitely will listen to you as we kind of talk about, kind of, heterosexual love, between black men and black women. One of the things that she says in this, that really, I think, stuck out to me. I'm trying to see if I can find it. When militant black male leaders dominating the anti-racist movement made freedom synonymous with the subordination of black women, their uncritical embrace of the notion that black men had been symbolically castrated was not challenged by men. We hear that particular dialogue a lot on this app, where it's like, oh, black woman won't let me be a man. Oh, what I mean, this is I want a black woman who's submissive. If only they be submissive. They're the ones that are the problem. And it's like, we have to look a little deeper than that. I understand that, there can be people, we all as individuals bring our own baggage and our own issues and problems to any relationship that we're in until we individually invest in the healing of those issues. But at the same time, to just blame it all on one group, when they're not the catalyst of those issues, is not helping the problem. You know what I mean? Kat says, I want a generation where we can mostly remember positive impacts on them. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I don't know if I may get on again. I may do another chapter. I'm going to end this live, and so that I can post this, and people don't have, a very long video to listen to when they're listening to this chapter. Danny says, raise 3 black children, including a black son, without their father. I love to join on here. Yeah, feel free. Send me do you have 1,000 followers? You only have 180. So, we got to get you. So everybody, Danny Lovestar, if you would, if y'all have the wherewithal to follow her, help her get to 1,000. Follow each other. Make sure you're following each other. But yeah, you have to have 1,000 followers to be able to speak. To go live with me. It's 46 people in this room now, 47. So, we can get you close to that, or, get you closer to that. But once you get to 1,000, we'd be glad to hear your voice. Absolutely. All right. So, give thanks. Thank you all for joining me today. I'm going to try and get these live recordings up on our YouTube shortly. And then I may get on again and do another chapter, because I'm going through this book, man. This book is really powerful, and I'm really enjoying this discussion. Tony, someone says, I wish men could hear themselves and work through how their mothers, their mothers are the subjects of men. That was powerful. When we talked about how, black men, because, if they had mothers that just, their strategy was to just do everything for them, that when they grew older as men, they had the same expectation that they wanted a woman who would just do any and everything for them and just, basically be doormats. And at the same time, resented their mother because, they felt their mother was controlling and quote unquote wouldn't let them be a man. And so you have this situation where they bring in the high expectation of submission, but also an underlying resentment for that submission, almost a contempt, for not taking care of yourself, not, being more autonomous, but also at the same time demanding that you sacrifice that autonomy. So you're put in a situation where you can't really win, with a man because of, he hasn't dealt with those mother wounds. And then that was also another reason she gives for, black men saying they have more fulfilling relationships outside of the race because it's not, subconsciously connected to the relationship they had with their mother. She got really deep on this chapter, and I was blown away. And it really, I know that because in another place in this book, she talks about the reasons why black men don't necessarily seek out therapy because it was previously associated with, a lot of white practitioners who didn't necessarily have the context outside of white supremacist thinking to, be able to rightfully help black people deconstruct those issues. Because if you're still, holding this prejudice in your heart about me just because of the color of my skin, you're definitely not going to be able to help me heal from it. You know what I mean? And that kind of comes through, even though, people that are trained in that do know to a certain extent how to mask themselves. It still comes through, in some of the solutions that they recommend, and some of the ways that they kind of go about their questioning, and just the lack of context. Sometimes that happens. So, because of that, therapy kind of got a bad name in that regards. And I think you still have to be very careful with the therapist that you choose. That does not mean that counseling is not beneficial. It just means that you have to, spend more time interviewing your therapist and interviewing your counselor to make sure they have the right set of skills and modalities to address your issues. If I'm dealing with addiction issues, I'm not going to go to just a Christian counselor because they're not well versed in helping people overcome addictions. They're well versed in helping people get back into church and deal with the church hurt, maybe. So you have to, spend a little bit more time, and that's what I'm currently in the process of doing myself. Whoa, wow, I missed a lot of comments. Let's see here. I've noticed a lot are submissive in relationships with white women. Ooh, okay. We have a lot of black therapists now. There's no excuse. That's Cassie. Facts. That's why I think the black community needs more professional therapists. I'm glad it's not just me. Let's not forget the standards are very low. Black doesn't always mean right either. Facts. Are these readings posted on YouTube? Some of them are. I think I got up to chapter 4. I'll be posting the rest of them during this week to get them up. Yep. And my YouTube is on my profile with the little link thing that you click on. So feel free to subscribe. I'm glad to have you. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and end this live unless someone wants to, has any other thoughts. I disagree. I know many people in church who are former addicts and well equipped. So, and that's fine. I mean, your personal experience of the people that you know who are former addicts and well equipped, may be the case. I don't understand what you're disagreeing with because I never said that, people in the church couldn't be former addicts and be effective. So I don't understand what you're disagreeing about. I think you may have been triggered by something I said that kind of touched on religion. And that's fine. That happens. But I would challenge you to really think about what I actually said versus what you heard me say or what you interpreted I said. Because like I said, I've been in the church for over 10 years. I've seen many, great, religious clergy who were former addicts be able to help people. What I was saying, as far as that is concerned, is the framework of religion the nature of the conversation of specifically about sexuality and black male female relationships, at least in the mainstream, has not changed overall. And I cited TD Jake's recent monologue that's been going around TikTok as an example of that. And you might say, well, my experience is different, and that's perfectly fine, but that does not negate what I'm saying. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's all good. You know what I mean? It happens. You know what I mean? I understand. Um, he's talking about the fact that there are actually people that study alcoholics over people. Yeah. Who just pray it away. Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, that's something that I actually didn't touch on, but I wish I had, and that goes along with praying the gay away, or praying addiction away, and not actually getting. First of all, accepting who you are. We're talking about sexuality. One of the things that is not preached is acceptance. You know what I mean? That hey, I my sexuality is different than yours, and that's okay. No, it's you got a demon in you. We got to pray it out. It's all those type of things that can be harmful. And those things still go on in some churches. I'm not saying all churches. Some churches have tried to evolve, but overall, when you talk about especially where the religious movements are coming from, it is still very much rooted in the conversation that's been happening for decades, and that narrative hasn't changed overall. All right. So, with that being said, yeah, a lot of churches. Yeah, let's keep it real. You know what I mean? Don't try and make your exception the rule, and we have to just keep that in mind. You know what I mean? And that's overall. You know what I mean? It goes back to the not all men thing. Yes, there are not all men are these predatory creatures that are trying to take advantage of women. Not all men. But overall, we have to acknowledge that we live in a patriarchal society that's set up and was established for the benefit of men and the exclusion of women when it comes to power. We have to acknowledge that. And if you're not willing to acknowledge that power dynamic that exists regardless of your mentality and personal approach to women, then you will find yourself kind of in a limbo with many of these conversations. Where they aren't very productive because you're trying to base the entire narrative of the conversation on your personal experience and your personal interactions versus what the way society was set up and the history behind that and the reason why it was set up that way. And you can apply that to conversations of racism. You can apply that to conversations of sexism, of sexuality, all the way down. I mean, we continue to just try to impose, what our personal values are as a defense mechanism against the entire thing. You know what I mean? So, we're talking about Christianity and how people were hurt in the process of Christianity being propagated in this country, and you're like, well, wait a minute, those must not be real Christians, and that's called cognitive dissonance. You know what I mean? It's it's us getting defensive, not putting on one person or the other, because we all have the potential for cognitive dissonance, but we have to be able to kind of think about where that defensive feeling is coming from, deconstruct that, and then be able to approach what's being said with an open mind that your experience may not be all experiences, right? Susan, yeah, you just let me see if I can invite you. Yeah, because you have give me 1 second, Susan. Let me see if I can help you out. All right, I just invited you, so if you expectation to join. There you are.
Okay.
Expectation to join. There you are.
Okay. So I I recently made a discovery. There was this one. I've always loved horses. Okay, and there was a video that I saw uh, of a saddlebred horse that had obviously been surgically altered in order to perform better in the ring, quote unquote. And people in the comments were saying, no, that wasn't done that way. And I was looking up research about saddlebred horses and nicking and all this stuff. Uh, and I discovered even animal cruelty can circle back to slavery and racism. Let me explain. The saddlebred horse, formerly known as the Kentucky Saddler, was originally bred for plantation owners to have a pretty, tall, high stepping horse to ride on where they oversaw everything that was going on. It's like everything wrong with the world seems to circle back to colorism, tribalism, any type of ism that has to do with I'm different than you're different than me, therefore you're beneath me, therefore I can treat you differently and less than, and I can take your stuff.
I can understand. Look, what I would to put alongside that notion of animal cruelty, I would
Uh huh.
say that um, in the way we have treated the indigenous people of this land, and I'm speaking of the
Mhm.
United States of America, what we also did was reject their very much in tuneness with the environment. They believed in living alongside the environment, in respecting the animals and the water and the air, and not putting humanity in dominion above those things. You know what I mean? But when you look at, um, how the colonizer mindset was really designed to extract resources in a very mechanical way, not only from the people, but also from the land and the animals, then yes,
Yes.
I can definitely understand where that notion is incongruence and would also help to explain why we're in this position now, where we're talking about sustainability all of a sudden because we
Mhm.
realize that the way we've been operating since the Industrial Revolution has been destroying the planet.
Oh, also I noticed that um I read somewhere that in communities where they were redlined, it is I believe on average in the summertime about 15 degrees hotter in those neighborhoods than in uh, adjacent neighborhoods, specifically because there's the lack of trees
Mm-hmm.
to dissipate the heat from the concrete and the pavement reflecting heat off of each other. And it's almost like we can heal humanity and solve the issue of um, racism and the effects that it has on people while we also heal the earth. It's almost like it's interconnected because, like you were saying, the colonizer mindset has been the cause of basically all of the evils of the world, as far as I can say.
No, absolutely. And T rightfully calls out this is off topic.
Uh huh.
What we were talking about was this reading on
Mhm.
really black love between men and women and specifically heterosexuality. But I'm
Right.
glad that you brought these things up because,
Uh huh.
as K Shep says, we were and still view as less than animals. Animals have more rights than we do. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
so that is, though off topic, still a reality that needs to be deconstructed. You know what I mean? Needs to
Mhm.
be deconstructed.
Honestly, I have been meaning to listen to every live that you've been reading the books on. I'll just have to buy it because I've missed all but like two.
No, absolutely. I would definitely encourage you to buy it. It's a great
Yeah,
book.
but thanks for letting me on. I appreciate it.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. You have a good
Uh
day.
huh. You too.
And anyone else like to hop on? Um, yeah, anybody can read this book, and that's like I said, it's important at least from a certain perspective, if you can understand the context that um, we are having a discussion about black love, and so there are going to be some things that you can parallel outside of that discussion, and there are going to be some things that are going to be exclusively inherent to this discussion amongst black people. If you can understand that and respect that, I think there's definitely room for you to pull from this book and pull from this discussion, because it's talking about love in general. First of all, we're all human beings. Love is a universal emotion, and we all exist in this patriarchal, white supremacist, capitalist structure that is being talked about in this book. How you experience it and how what you bring to that discussion as a black man will be different than what you bring to this discussion as a black woman, and also what you bring to this discussion as a white woman or a white man or someone of another ethnicity is also going to be different. And as long as you can respectfully kind of understand those differences and quote unquote read the room, there's room for everyone in this discussion. It's just that I think the problem happens when we try to critique um, in a way that ignores, again, what I was saying before about the power dynamic, right? The social power dynamic, not your individual power over someone else, but the social power dynamic. For example, when we talk about feminism being described as patriarchy, having a boot, patriarchy being described as a boot being on a woman's neck, if I'm as a man am entering that discussion about patriarchy, I cannot critique the woman who has the boot on her neck and how she should deal with that, how she should process her trauma, how should she react and try to get the boot off of her. I don't have the ability to soundly, what I mean, in an intellectually honest type of way, critique what she does with that situation. I can only try to see, okay, how can I help to empower her while making sure I'm not participating in this boot, while trying to get this boot off of her as well. So as long as we can understand that dynamic, we can enter this conversation and have a great dialogue. So absolutely, you're most definitely welcome. Anyone else before we come down from this place? Does anyone else want to share, verbally in the live, or if you want to type any comments or reflections in the comments section, I'll be glad to read those aloud as well. So you're part of that recording. Okay, all right. So thank you all so much for joining. There's a couple of my mutuals that are on live, so I think I'm going to hop on their live for a little bit, and I may come back and read some more. But I'll definitely be back tomorrow morning, Lord willing, with some more to read. All right, thank you so much. You all have a great day and be blessed.